Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in to the Nerds and Jesus podcast. Welcome. My name is Mary Howell. I am a Christian, a worship leader who happens to also be a huge nerd according to myself, all of my friends, family, and coworkers. And recently I've been wanting to discuss how Christian nerds are to navigate living in the secular world, how we are to be a light in the darkness while also nerding out in all types of fandoms pop culture has to offer. And today we will be talking and reviewing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Super exciting. But I am not on this podcast alone, as I am joined this week by coworker, student director at his church, starred on the Yes I Will music video, Jalen Taylor. Jalen, how's it going?
It's going pretty good, Mary. How are you doing?
Doing well. Excited that you're able to jump on this pod. We have prepared for this episode. You saw it twice yesterday?
I saw it twice, back to back, and I cried back to back. And let's just say that I'm fully ready for this episode.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, all the feels, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But first question, I got two questions for you that I always ask my guests. Okay. One question is, how long have you been a Christian? And if you want to share a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I've been a Christian going on, I think it's 6 years this November. I grew in and out of church, more out than in. Decided to leave my hometown to come to MTSU. Up in Murfreesboro. And then I found the Lord in a season of just recklessness, of just like partying and all that stuff, and got saved when I was 18 at my first church that I started going to in Murfreesboro. And then I've just been like running with the Lord ever since. I feel like God has just placed me in just very unique situations, and every situation has just grown me to help me and prepare me to be the man that I am today.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And for listeners, I have the cool part of being also coworker with Jalen at church and everything like that. Different campuses, but at least we're all around each other. But we were a part of the same called Ministers in Training program for a whole year together. So it's been fun to have some of our guests on it that we've been on that journey together. But so other question part 2 is, how big of a nerd are you? And if you can choose your top fandom or games that is your niche, that is what you want to talk about, what would those 3 be?
I would say I'm pretty big nerd. I would say my nerd started off probably when I was like 5 years old. I was huge into wrestling. I had all the action figures. I didn't miss an episode of Raw or SmackDown. I watched pretty much all the pay-per-views. But I would say now I'm probably big into, if it's not Marvel, it's definitely video games. Love video games. I mean, I feel like that's a very common answer for somebody in their mid-20s. But I feel like my nerdom started in that 5-year-old age, and I was wrestling and then video games, and then it just formed into what I consider now just a full-on addiction to Marvel and video games. So I would say that.
Very cool. Yeah, I speaking of video games, PS4 Hogwarts Legacy finally came out for the rest of us. So been playing that a lot lately.
Hallelujah.
My sister's like, well, she's gonna play it too. And so I was like, all right, here's the controller. You can start as we're here recording the podcast. She's downstairs playing. Man, have you played it yet, Hogwarts Legacy?
I have not. I literally saw it on the PlayStation Store last night. I was like,
it's out.
I gotta get it.
I'm not too far in, so it's been really cool. The start. I was like, I'll just play for a little bit last night. 1 a.m. I was like, I was like, I can only do it on Friday nights. Really, Saturdays is not possible, but Friday nights works. Sweet. Yeah, so as far as Marvel goes, what's your history with Marvel? When you remember the first, the first time you were ever introduced to either Marvel comics or or into the comics more, or are you into more of the cinematic universe?
Definitely more into the cinematic. I got probably introduced, my very first character, I'm sure there's a lot of people's very first character was Spider-Man. I grew up having, this sounds so embarrassing, but I had the Spider-Man tidy whities. And those were my favorite. I wore those all the time. But then probably when I was a teenager, I was like, I can't be a nerd. I was getting more into sports, and so I kind of weaned off. But I picked back up into it probably right before COVID happened, and just binge watch. And then obviously when COVID happened, I was like, have time to catch up, and so I just like
Oh yeah.
deep dove back into all the Marvel stuff.
No.
I would
Nowadays it's
love to
hard
get
to catch up.
yes. Oh my! If you're not caught up, I'm sorry. You're probably never going to be caught up. So it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, my man, I would say Spider-Man's probably obviously Tobey Maguire, you know, those movies
Mm-hmm.
just hit home so much for me.
Mm-hmm.
And man, when that, you know, the latest Spider-Man film came out, I think we were all millennials, all of us were all cloud nine
Yeah.
when that moment, even with Andrew Garfield's too. But yeah, I would say Spider-Man's probably my first one. If you could see, I don't know if you can see it in the behind me. We're also recording video. There's a Spider-Man
Okay.
right there.
Okay.
So Spider-Man's
I'm
probably one
here
of my
for it.
favorite. Yeah. And have some comics up too. But yeah, as far as the comics goes for me, I don't think I didn't really dive too much into the comics. I think I did more a little bit later, right when Infinity
Mm,
War was coming out. You know, I saw a lot of things online about, oh, it's well, what I ended up doing, I'd watch the movies. I'm like, all right, so what happens next? Like, what is the history of this character? So then I kind of go in and I dive into the history of those characters in the
right.
comics. So whenever Infinity War and Endgame came out, I got really into like I read the actual comics of those and obviously so different from the movie, but you know, I got to learn a little bit more about Adam Warlock, which, you know, he is in this
Yeah.
film.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he
Um,
is.
I have a lot of opinions about that character right now, but that we're gonna do non-spoilers first, and then later on we'll do
No
spoilers.
spoilers. No spoilers.
Um, so that was really, but I feel like even when the Iron Man movies came out, like right when the first Iron Man movie came out, I watched it. I watched almost every movie in theaters. Um, but I think what really clicked, I'm like, oh, this is a big thing. When I remember watching the first Avengers film, it
Mm,
was my freshman year of college. It was I just dated myself. I was like, I was like, oh no. It was no, but was it freshman or sophomore? I think it was has to be my freshman year of college. Um, yeah, and I remember watching that in theaters here, and I was just like, wait, they're all together in a movie? Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is so crazy. Like, they're all together, they're all talking.
right. Yeah.
And oh my gosh, at the time I was like a huge Thor fan. Still am a Thor fan, but as you watch the other ones, I was like, okay, no, I am actually a Loki fan. I understand now. Yeah, and so that was just my history with it, and being able to go to almost every opening, like night or you know, the opening night is like one of the coolest experiences. I've cosplayed at a couple conventions of different Marvel characters. Got to go to Dragon
Yes.
Con. I've cosplayed as Scarlet Witch has been the main one that I've been cosplaying as. Um, I think I've done it twice. The second time I was so dedicated, my hair was orange. So I was like, my
Oh,
hair like literally dyed my
that's
hair
commitment.
all red to the same color as her, so I can like be that year, just be able to cosplay as her. And I had long hair
Wow.
too at the time. Yeah. So I did the WandaVision one, but the really simple one. I literally did the one
Mm-hmm.
where she has the jumps, like the sweater on with
Mm-hmm.
literally sweats, like everything like that. So that's, I'm like, easy peasy. Because but if you've never been to like a convention, Dragon Con, Dragon Con's like closer to us, I guess. It's like Atlanta. We're in Nashville area, so 4 hours away.
Mm-hmm.
Super cool because they have a whole Marvel, like a Marvel meetup for all the cosplayers who dress up as Marvel. And so this was the
Mm,
year that it was one of their anniversaries for Marvel. And Marvel Studios is in Atlanta area in Fayetteville, Georgia, at Piedmont Studios actually. And so my sister lived near that area, and she lived by the studios, and so we always would pass it. I remember seeing the Avengers sign on the side of it when they were filming. I was like, oh my gosh. But they anyway, but long story short, but at the convention they had the meetup, and the actual guys from the movie who worked on their props showed up with the actual Infinity Stones that they had
oh my
used in the
gosh.
film, and also Loki's scepter, the actual one.
Oh,
And they took a picture of it and they posted it on their social media, and I got it. I made it on their social media, Marvel's social media page, and I was so excited. Like, yes, I made it. This is it. I'm done. I got it. So that just tells you how big of a Marvel nerd I am. I think I love DC comics. I think
mm,
a little bit. I don't know. I love them both. I think I've read more of the DC comics, but the TV shows are phenomenal. I think we've all can
yeah.
say that. The movies of DC, bleh. But Marvel movies,
Mm-hmm.
great. And now they re-entered the TV shows, which are great as well. So yeah, Marvel kind of tops
Yes.
it. Um, Anyway, Guardians of the Galaxy. So let's talk non-spoilers first, and
No
then we can
spoilers.
dive into the spoilers. So non-spoiler, um, it was all the emotions.
It was it honestly, it was probably the first Marvel movie where they really just entice all of your emotions and really just like,
Yes.
oh, did this happen? Oh no, no, and then it's like I felt like I was on a roller coaster the whole
Mm-hmm.
time, but it was just
Like
such a good, such a good film.
when you're comparing this film with Thor, the recent Thor movie that came
Mm,
out, I feel like Thor, they tried way too hard of like spitting jokes all the time that it never
yes.
felt very serious, which is what I think what
Hmm.
we haven't gotten the seriousness of a movie really since Endgame. I feel like every film has been trying too hard to kind of go back to like, hey, joke here, joke there, and
Yeah,
man, this film, James Gunn, phenomenal job.
dude,
Marvel's definitely going to miss James
bravo.
Gunn. Obviously, I'm excited for him, and part of DC now. He's one of the co-CEOs there. So I'm hoping he could bring some of that, what he brought in this last film, because bravo. If you're have a hard time, listeners, of animal cruelty or kids, I would definitely put a warning
Yeah,
label for this film.
yeah,
I It was hard for, you pretty much saw a little bit of that in the trailer, so it's not too much of a spoiler there. I cried at every movie whenever there's an animal that is hurt or an animal that's involved with animals. I refuse to watch movies with animals, but because I'm a Marvel fan, I'm like, oh, I gotta sit through it. I have to sit through it. Like, I did not like the last Avatar movie because one of the a
oh
whale
yeah,
characters died. And I was like, I did not
yeah.
like this movie because of that reason. And I cried in the first Airbud movie whenever the kids like that dog to leave. I
Oh
cried
my
like a baby.
gosh.
So any kind of my whole family and friends know I'm like, if there's an animal in it, I'm like, I'm not watching it. So this film, I was like, oh dang, I know it's gonna be hard. And I saw the
Mm-hmm.
trailer and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh Lord. So and but it brought such of awareness, I feel like, too. But we'll get into that a little bit. But Rocket's story, beautifully told.
I'm finally glad that we're able to finally piece together his origin story because I feel like that was the only part that we were missing.
We really saw
Because we,
everyone else's in a way.
yeah, and so it kind of it was the glue that brought everything together, and I'm just like, okay, I can finally be at peace with this being the final one, not be left on some cliffhanger.
Yeah, it was so well done, and just the love that you see they have for Rocket,
Mm,
and um just everyone else's story of just their love and their brotherhood and the family that they've created is that
mm-hmm.
second family that I think a lot of people may not even will really obviously have related to. I think why Guardians has been so successful is finding that family who's not you're not related to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been really cool. And yeah, how it's it's definitely one you need to go watch. It's probably one of the best ones since Endgame, I would say. As
Mm-hmm.
it just Yeah, bravo. I was like, if I could applaud right now and stand up. Um, I I was not used to. I went to the early showing, and we went to the early showing at the
Yeah.
11 a.m. one. I am not used to going to the morning ones because usually the night ones are where they're like super hype. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I need that hypeness. But honestly, this movie probably didn't have as much of the hype. I mean, it had its hilarious moments, of course, like
Oh.
beautifully salted in throughout the whole film. But
Mm.
this was a film that needed to bring it down to seriousness level. And I know they already talked about this. All had the first like their first cuss
Yes,
word,
the
F
first F
bomb.
bomb. The first F
Um,
bomb.
so which is funny.
Which I didn't think that was like rushed or I felt like it was very just like natural. And
Yeah,
then I was like, that fits. I feel like it wasn't
yeah.
forced. I
And
feel
for
like it
those
was
who
like
are not
perfectly timed.
like, obviously as Christians, we're not accustomed normally within our circles to hear a lot of cuss
Mm-hmm.
words or F bombs. And just with the secular world nowadays, you kind of hear it all the
Mm-hmm.
time. So it wasn't like a lot that it would make you uncomfortable. I feel like that's just my
Yeah.
opinion. Unfortunately, we're now so used to it hearing it all the time in films that it just kind
Yeah.
of goes over our head a little bit.
Which that's
Um,
another topic.
that's a whole other topic, yeah. So just, if you're a parent listening and you want to know, like, hey, is this a good film for my kids? I would wait a little bit if they're younger kids and they've seen the first two.
Yes, there are some parts that it can get a little squeamish, especially.
Yeah, just with, all the animal cruelty part of
Yeah,
it. I mean, the story is beautifully done. I mean, if you think your kid can handle it, I mean, you know your child more than we know your child.
exactly.
It's like,
So,
um,
man,
but yeah, I made it PG-13. I would say definitely
yeah,
the rating makes sense for that.
yes.
But anyway, so that's our non-spoiler review. So if you have not watched the film yet, go watch it and then return back at this point for the spoiler.
Cut it off. Shut off the podcast right now.
So we're starting the spoilers in 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Wow. Okay. I cried throughout the whole movie. I feel like,
dude,
I was like trying not to like ugly cry through this film.
Yes. And like the opening shot, like that opening shot was just like, it sets the tone. It's like, oh my gosh, like this is
It was so
insane.
serious. It was serious. I'm like,
Yes.
oh, this is a serious opener right now.
Yes. It wasn't, they get straight into it. Really, the first 10 minutes of the film, it's just like, boom, we're going. There's no subtleness. There's no like, we're gonna wait to introduce the big bad and give his backstory. It was like, no, we're off to the races.
Yeah. Man, I think, well, it picks off right at the end. If you didn't watch the Christmas special, with Kevin Bacon, it was phenomenal.
Oh gosh.
It was great. But you really see them back in nowhere. And they've created this community, this city of just a safe space. It's their headquarters now. But you really start off at the beginning with, Rocket as like a baby raccoon, and oh man, when you see the hand reaching every single time, I'm like, I need to protect the babies. Like, oh my gosh. Oh, it was so hard to watch. And then, transferring over, you see Rocket, and we go into, nowhere, and we see Peter, drunk and obviously still struggling with the loss of Gamora. And it looks like it's been a recurring theme that they were just again not surprised by it. So seeing that for him, I was like, dang, like, but in a way I'm like, I feel like they didn't really show that part of it in the other, like the Christmas special, right?
Yeah, they really
I feel like all of a sudden, now he's drunk.
Yeah, like the Christmas special definitely focused more on Drax and Mantis.
Yeah, and we didn't really see much of Peter in it.
Yeah, we didn't see Peter until the big reveal that Mantis and him were siblings. So it was definitely kind of weird to have like, oh, he's a full blown alcoholic right now. Like this is kind of different, but okay. But like it makes sense,
man. Even it was really cool to see even the different characters that have settled into nowhere. My brain is not remembering the dog's name. I'm gonna look it up because I'm gonna drive me crazy. Just Space Dog. It's Cosmo. Cosmo. So take it back. I'm not a bad dog. Take it back.
Yes.
Like that's what I feel like my dog would be like.
I felt like Cosmo was the perfect companion for this film. I feel like he was the perfect, like kind of like comic relief in a lot of ways. She was just like absolutely perfect.
And we never saw I mean, we saw a little bit of Cosmo, I think, in some of the other films, like just sprinkled in there, like, oh look, there's Cosmo the dog, like nothing special. But I had no idea that they would actually put her as like I'm guessing it's a she,
I assume so.
Yeah. But putting as Cosmo, like actually have, part of the team, and you see at the very, very end, she joins the Guardians.
Yeah.
With telepathy and everything like that. But even like Kraglin too, their relationship together.
Which his
story too. We see that.
Yes, I kind of wanted more of that. I was like,
that glimpse of Yondu at the end. Oh, like Yondu, like, we loved
exactly
him so much.
What we needed, because like honestly, just didn't feel right without Yondu there. And I was like, yeah, like he has Arrow now, but like I feel like we need Yondu, and then Yondu just shows up, and it's like.
I know, because it's been so frustrating not see him use, the arrow correctly, and but you see that him just trying throughout the whole film, especially. Okay, so we see Peter, they put him to bed, and Rocket's looking at the swipe card, which we didn't know at the time what it was. He was looking at it,
Yes.
and
Yes.
in comes Adam Warlock. And let me tell you,
Oh, this
I
guy.
was a little disappointed with Adam Warlock
Yeah.
because he and I guess they kind of played it to where like, oh, he wasn't ready to be born yet or to be released yet,
Yeah.
so he's not at full maturity. And I think that's where I was just expecting mature Adam Warlock, and I think that's why I
Mm,
was just really disappointed with him. Like this is at least as far as I don't remember how he is in the comics. Um, because Adam Warlock, I mean, he's this dude, especially um for those of you who don't know who Adam Warlock is, or maybe this is your first reaction to him. If you remember back in the second Guardians at the very end, is it second Guardians, I believe?
yeah.
Yeah, it was like a um end credit scene. And so you see like, oh, Adam's coming, So they had that expectation. So because it was during the second film, everybody expected Adam Warlock to show up in Infinity Game. Basically combined both. Infinity War and Endgame. You see them really come together. And so we expected him to show up, but he didn't. And so we're like,
Mm.
I we thought that was kind of like a throw. Like, did they just like throw away Adam Warlock because he's such, you know, I don't know, he's such a huge deal in the comics as far as that whole story plot. So we were kind of curious of how he was going to be played into, this current scene and this current film. Um, yeah, I don't know. Have you like watched a little bit more of Adam's story, or did you know a little bit more about him before?
Yeah. I I learned a lot from Adam Warlock, just from a YouTube channel called New Rock Stars. So shout out to New Rock Stars. If you ever want like Easter eggs on like all the Marvel movies, there are people to go to. But they did a breakdown of him, and he supposedly in the comics is supposed to be like way more mature, way more grown. And I felt like in this film they kind of just babied him, and kind
Yeah.
of we really didn't get to see his power on full display outside of like his first interaction on screen. And even then, it's like I kind of wanted more. I kind of wanted to it go dark, then just kind of like Nebula just comes in and kind of just like boom, and then for the rest of the movie, he's kind of like this mama's boy who needs to
Yeah.
be
Ugh.
chaperoned. So it was kind
Because
of just like,
yeah, like Adam, whenever Thanos, like this is in the comics, like whenever Thanos acquired, the Infinity Gauntlet along with, all the Infinity Stones, um, Adam Warlock, he partnered with the group of heroes. They worked to defeat Thanos together, restore balance, to the universe. And, he has been shown to even, and he had the Soul Stone. He was the one who
mhm,
possessed the Soul Stone, which is completely different from what the films did. And so which gave him control over souls and the ability to manipulate reality. So that was a lot of what Adam did. And Warlock had undergone like numerous transformations and even um became like a messianic figure known as Magus. I can probably
yeah,
mispronouncing it. And he later manifested into his evil doppelganger, so there's a whole part of it of Adam Warlock's story. And he was even known as him, which Adam, is very
hmm
biblical in that sense as well. When we kind of compare to that, when there's always little, I think I talked about this a little bit with, JT as far as DC, a lot of comics and a lot of films always, grab things from the word where they'll be like, oh, well, let's use that and kind of move it around. But,
yeah,
um, yeah, it was interesting to see that because man, Adam had such a huge part of it and in the films. But yeah, Adam in this film, I was a little disappointed. But maybe we see his journey throughout the whole thing of you know, oh, it's like, well, you see that redemption at the end of where Drax is like, hey, what was the line that he gave?
I think he said something like everyone deserves a second chance or
Yes,
something like that.
and he was just so shocked of the grace that he was given.
Mm,
Oh,
come on,
I was
Adam was
like,
shown
oh,
grace.
oh. Let's
Mm,
talk. Oh, that's the whole thing right there. Dang.
mm,
Wow. Even yeah, Adam, mankind, shown
hmm
grace.
Oh,
Ugh.
there. This movie, I will say, if you do go watch this movie and you're a Christian, you would definitely see a lot of religious undertone and just a story of just mankind and even the Most High. I forgot his name. Um, he is seen as like this God figure, and so it's a lot of religious
The
undertone.
high
But like,
evolutionary.
yes, he's pretty much like the God. He calls himself a God. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool how even in a secular movie, how you can connect things back to the Bible and how we can see how the world is still influenced from the Bible.
Yeah, he wanted to play God. He created a counter Earth.
Yeah.
Another Earth where he can create his creations, and he was so disappointed of what he created that he was willing to destroy them all.
Yes.
And isn't that interesting? Because my mind sometimes kind of goes back to the Ark. I was like,
I
dang.
mean, yes,
But not in
and
a
yeah,
way, obviously. Yes and no.
no.
But
I
that's
mean,
just,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, because like
It's like,
even in the ark, God chose Noah to like have his family take two of a kind, and so even the high evolutionary, he kind of did the same thing, or he just
putting
wanted
all of them
rock.
in, yeah,
Yes, because he had
all the
the
kids.
kids, and he was going to use Rocket's brain to, yeah. So in a way, yes, it was kind of like Noah in the story of the flood, except there was no flood; it was just
But yeah,
fire.
he wanted to do this all over again, even though Earth already had
Yeah,
humanity and they were already evolved. And um, but what's interesting, having them as animals. I don't know, the whole scene counter Earth was really interesting to see. But anyway, getting ahead of myself.
yeah,
But Adam Warlock comes in, and because of that whole battle is really where it starts the whole journey of saving Rocket. Um, and Rocket is pretty much on his deathbed for the majority of the film.
yeah.
Um, and we see I thought I was really tasteful on how they placed a lot of his past throughout the film,
Yes,
leading up
yes.
to the big moment of our growing hate for the high evolutionary.
Yes, I felt like if they would just given us all of Rocket's like pass in one smooth
We'd be
shot
like, all
or
right,
one,
now what?
and been kind of like, okay, then we forgot about Rocket because he's literally dying for majority of this movie. But the fact that
Ugh,
like there's so many
yeah.
times where they use that to break up either the tension or break up the fight scene or fuel the tension and motivation, it was really really cool. It was I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was too much. I thought they did a phenomenal job with that.
Yeah. Man. And can we please talk about like poor Lila and
Oh,
poor, oh my
Teefs
gosh.
and
Teeps
Floor.
and Floor.
The fact
Floor.
that she named herself Floor. The
Oh,
fact,
I tried, I couldn't think about it. I had it literally in my mind. I'm like, they're not real. They're not real. They're not real. It's CGI. It's CGI because the the bunny and the walrus
uh,
and I couldn't, like, that was so hard to see of like her mouth was
yeah.
transformed.
Why did they do
Oh,
that to Floor? Like every other animal, they were kind of creepy, but they were like, okay, they're still cute.
they just
But
have like, oh, Flora's creepy.
Floor is creepy.
You know,
She's as creepy as that thing that Mantis let out at the end, and she's like,
oh,
ah,
you're
like
beautiful too, or something. Man,
yeah,
it a lot of seeing when I saw a lot of it reminded me a lot of whenever Sid in Toy Story would manipulate,
yes,
the toys and would change their body
hmm,
parts. It had that kind of vibe for me a little bit, but that was so hard to watch. And just their, oh man, when they first put Rock into that cage and his little sweet little
uh,
voice, he was just pain and pain. I'm trying not to cry again. Ugh,
dude,
that was
they
so hard.
it was very hard to watch because it's like in real world perspective, like how many animals
Have
go
been,
through that same situation, except they can't speak English. They're communicating to
yeah.
each other.
Well,
But
even
yet,
Nebula, what she
yeah,
said, this is worse than what Thanos did to her. Like,
yeah,
I'm glad they didn't show us exactly the pain. Like, they didn't show us the surgery
hmm,
part or whatever it is with Rocket for that reason. I mean, sometimes left to the imagination, sometimes could even be worse than what you can imagine. But like, I'm glad they didn't do that because I think that would have been a little bit too much. Yeah, I've read online of people even walking out because they just couldn't deal with the cruelty of the
yeah,
animals, and I get it, and I feel like this is a film I don't know if I'm going to watch again. You watched it twice, bro. I was like,
I did.
I can't,
I
I couldn't. I don't think I could. It had to be a long time because it was so hard to watch.
Yeah, the first time I watched it, I definitely was like, "Oh, this is hard." The second time, like even though I knew it was still coming, I still was like, "Oh, this is still hard to watch," just because like I love animals. I don't own any animals, but I love animals. I'm not some type of like save the earth type of person, but I don't like when animals get mistreated. And so just seeing this film just really dive into that, it just sucks because it shows how humanity, us as humans, we can look at animals and see them as less than, but yet God created them the same way that He created us. Obviously, they don't have souls like us, and so, but at the same time, like He took time to create them, and so they're meaningful. Like they
Yeah.
help us. Like without animals, like we probably won't survive.
Yeah.
So
Man. Anyway, so I guess at this point, Rocket, he's um on his deathbed, and so they can't operate on him because there's a code, and so
yeah,
we see kind of that when Adam Warlock goes back to his folks, his people, we find out that that people was created by the high evolutionary and their
hmm
folks, which I didn't know that, so they revealed that. Yeah, they revealed that to us that they were all created, so um which was why Adam and all of them were kind of at this point where they needed to kind of get on it or they would be wiped, and
yeah,
so they take the trip to the orgosphere, um which was weird looking,
that was
first off.
so weird, so creepy. It's like, oh,
Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised to see Nathan Fillion back as one of the um what's it called? One of the cops, I guess, for the orgosphere.
yeah,
I've been watching just clips of the rookie, so that's why I think about him. Like, of course, he's back in this
yeah,
role. um, but well, obviously, before that, I totally forgot that Gamora was going to come back in this film. To be honest, at that point, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot she's coming back in this.
yes.
Um, so we see her as part of the Ravagers. So that's kind of been her journey. And we see Sylvester Stallone and all his folks that we saw before come back.
Which when I was reading like the opening title card, like I don't know why, I just glanced over his name and just didn't compute like he was going to be in this movie. But
Yeah,
like
I
the
saw
second
it. I
time
was
I
like,
watched
oh,
it, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense because the first time I was like, wait, where did he come from? It's like I'm so
literally.
confused.
Well, they were in I forgot which end credit scene their group was part of. I can't remember.
I
There's
don't
been so many end
remember.
credit scenes, but they
Yeah.
were in an end credit scene of
hmm
their like Sylvester Stallone and that whole group. So I was happy to have them back because I remember every time I'd watch that at least that part, I'm like, when are they coming in? Like, what was the point
hmm
of this end credit scene? So it's nice to see at least James Gunn remembering them and bringing them back into the Ravagers. And um, man, Quill, his whole like when they were like, trying to get into the orgosphere at this point, and he's like, he thinks it's in a separate comm,
Oh my
and they're like, we can hear you. And
god.
I was like, we were hoping it'd be over by now.
I think that's one of my favorite parts out of this whole film, just because like I can relate. Like brother was trying to shoot a shot, get
He
his
was
girl
trying
back,
so hard. She's like, bro,
but
I don't know you. I don't remember
yeah,
you. What? He keeps getting his name wrong.
I was just like, oh, this is great. Like, so,
But even the
uh,
part later on, we saw this in the trailer, which was so funny of like, why me? What about her with Nebula? And then he just stares at her. I didn't notice how black your eyes were. They're pretty
listen,
set.
after Gamora said that, I low key was trying to ship them together. I was like,
Nebula and Peter? A
yes,
little bit. Yeah, I
I
was
was like,
too. I can't
I was like, okay,
I
that
can't
could
see it,
work.
but what if? Um, oh man. It was just so good. So, they get into the orgosphere and Mantis, disposes
Mm,
of the suits outside, and they go into they go inside and everything, and you see them kind of working through with maintenance, and Quill, trying to impress Gamora and flirting with her, and Gamora's like, "Nah, bro, here, what, give us the code," all of a sudden.
exactly.
Um and so we see their whole journey of trying to get the code from Rocket, and obviously the High Evolutionary knows that they're going to show up, kind of thing. Um, and so was it there they're going to show up? Maybe not. I can't remember right now. Yeah. So that whole fight scene, I love seeing Drax and Mantis friendship grow more
Yeah.
and more. Even in this film, we see a little bit of that in the last one with the Christmas special, but
Hmm.
I just I'm remembering from the second film when they first met and they were just like Drax is like, "You are the ugliest thing," I could see. Like, and so but man, I think we always see Mantis and Drax, and it's true from Nebula's perspective as like, "Oh, they're just the funny ones, they're comic relief, they're not
Yeah.
like, what can they actually do?" To this film, Nebula telling them, kind of what we all kinda think a little bit about them, we love them,
Yeah.
but they're kinda not as reliable, but seeing their story of like, they bring so much to the team as well. It's been really cool to see both of them in it. Um but yeah, so the org the orgosphere happens. They're
Hmm.
able to get the thing, and so at this point, they realize they have to go to counter Earth. So,
Yes. Which I was very surprised how
and they know it's a trap, but no, it's a face off.
yes, it's a face off, it's not a trap. But I was also very surprised how the Ravagers they kind of just like skirted out of there. Like I
Yeah,
kind
I
of
thought they would
wanted
stick
them.
around.
Yeah, I thought they would stick around because like Gamora, like, but again, I guess the Ravager nature. They're just like, all right, things got bad, things got hot, boom, we're out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the Ravagers, one of them was caught by Adam Warlock and them,
Yes, he
and he
was.
just incinerates them, the poor little dog. I was like,
Uh,
"Dang." Or the dog, I just assume it's not a dog, but you know what I mean. The
dog,
dog-like
it's
creature.
something. Yeah, it's something.
Like my owner, he's gone. Oh, it killed me. He's like he just killed them. And, oh man. Obviously, Gamora is annoyed that she can't go home, so that's
Yeah.
kind of how they find her. But
Hmm.
they arrive at Counter Earth. Counter Earth was when I watched the trailer, I just assumed they were on Earth. I'm like, oh no, they're not on Earth. They're on Counter Earth.
Hmm.
Um, it's so interesting. Like everything is pretty much the same besides the people, and like, even to the car to little things like it's exactly the same. I was like, man, he even got the right type of car and the way it operates and the way it works
Yeah.
exactly the same. Like that and alone is impressive, really, even for the high evolutionary.
Which it's Earth, but it's like Earth in like the 80s, which is kind of like cool because like it matched up perfectly with the score of this movie because I feel like it was a lot of like classics and throwbacks. And like even when they got there, it's just like I don't know, you kind of feel like that community centric feel because like I feel like in the 80s it was a lot more just like people just hanging out, people were going around like walking. Um, but versus now, like you really don't see that a lot. And so it was kind of cool to see how when they land on Counter Earth, how everybody just shook because it's kind of like, what the heck's going on? Like we probably don't get visitors that much. Um, I thought it was perfect. I think James Gunn did an amazing job because I feel like if it had been Earth today, it'd been kind of like a little bit weird since Quill um, was abducted from Earth in the 80s. I feel like it was a good tie back to his story and all that stuff.
Well, even Mantis throwing in, well, for when was it? When they were saving Rocket? I don't know when it was when she was telling him, your grandfather's still probably alive, and go back to, like they're. I when she mentioned that I'm like, oh, he's probably gonna go back to Earth. I kind of already
Mhm.
suspected that
Yeah.
at the end. But yeah, counter at the whole story. So at one point, obviously we see them trying to communicate with them, and then they eventually get onto the ship, and Adam Warlock shows up, and they're fighting, and the whole rocket thing, and so you just kind of see that. But whenever they show up in on the High Evolutionaries ship, and at that point we've seen enough backstory of just the cruelty of but even what's so impressive, it was, Rocket's brain. That's why he was so, he wanted to study his brain because there was no other creature like Rocket that was as smart and who was
Mhm.
able to figure out how to, you know, really use like that new batch, supposedly that they were saying, that would be able to not be hostile, not be violent when they sped up the evolutionary process with those creatures, with the animals,
Yeah.
which was so hard to watch as well. The pain that they're going through eventually. Um, So that was interesting. But yeah, Rocket, I mean, that whole storyline, of course, broke my heart. And so whenever you see Rocket escape and he killed them, you see how Rocket escaped it. That was hard to watch, definitely, when he shot them, and you could just
Yeah.
see that high evolutionary is just spiraling at this point. And so whenever they were leaving, obviously he created a whole new group of kids that spoke a different language that eventually Drax understood.
Chirp, chirp.
Chirp chirp. And I'm like, how does Drax know this language? We don't really know, I
Yeah.
guess. But you just see how Drax came into play of just how much he was valued and needed in that moment to communicate with the kids, and that you see his story from the beginning. I mean, he lost his family. He was a father
Yeah.
to Thanos, what Thanos did to his family, and him be able to become like that dad again to them, and just being silly with them, and that whole fight with Mantis and Drax and Nebula, of Mantis is like, we are important, and
Yeah.
um man, that was super touching to see that. And um but yeah, and Quill and they were able to save Rocket, and them hearing his voice for the first time
Oh,
through the intercoms.
oh my gosh. I would have fainted and like melt if I was like Nebula.
Well, okay, so that moment whenever okay, I'm obviously fast forwarding, they met the high evolutionary, they went back to the ship. Everyone keeps going back and forth that they're never in the same place.
Yeah.
Um when Rocket died for that moment,
Mm.
I was so scared they were going to keep it in a way,
Oh,
and I was like, they can't do this. They can't. No, they're going to save him. They're going to save him. And then Peter just yelling in that moment. I mean, we knew that coming into
yeah.
the trailer that's what that scene was. At least I knew, I could figure it
Yeah.
out. But man, it was gut wrenching to hear them yell and scream, and that whole feeling. Um, but then yeah, they were able to save him, and we see Mantis, even her moment of those creatures, those big three creatures, of that her importance in that as well. Um, so when their ship, or I guess the ship that the High Evolutionary on was leaving, it was so interesting. The reason why, because I had gone to you, I was like, it just reminds me so much of a Celestial, of like, when the
Yes.
Celestial was in the middle of Earth there, it was such a big deal of like when they leave Earth, they're destroying Earth. So that's essentially almost kind of what was happening when this ship that he had was so large, and it was like literally in the planet. And
Yeah.
it was so large that just by it leaving, it really, I mean, I don't think much survived on that planet. We don't really know.
Yeah.
We didn't really see much of that. We saw that it was, everything was exploding. People, I mean, it was awful. Um, but we see that happening. And so it reminded me a little bit of Celestials. I was like, they kind of had the same kind of vibe of, this is what would happen, if this was Earth,
Right.
obviously on a much bigger scale. So I thought that was interesting seeing that. Um, yeah. And so that whole fight scene, eventually, we see them leave. And they, of course, called nowhere. Everyone to come.
Yes. The fact
That
that
was epic.
that skull just comes floating into frame, and it's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Everyone's coming in. Yeah, and so we see Rocket and his own ship, Drax, everybody, going into the same ship that High Evolutionary is in to go save everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that whole fight scene, epic fight scene. It was really
Oh,
great. And um oh yeah. And so that's kind of when the moments where we see eventually, they save all the kids, they get them out. And so they combine, they put the two, nowhere and also their spaceship together.
mm-hmm.
And you even see a lot of the High Evolutionary, like his team turn their back on him because like, you
Yes.
need to stop. Like, this is too far. You become obsessed with this. But yeah.
Yes. Which is like, it brings up an interesting question. It's like, why, when human beings get power, that we become so obsessed with the fact of like the loss of power?
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
just like, he just became so obsessed with it that even the people that he thought that were closest to him was like, dude, I can't follow you anymore. And so it's like, my question to you is like, how did you feel about it when he was like, there is no God? Because like, I feel like there are people that are watching these movies who may be an atheist, who may have that same thought, like, oh, there's no God out there, and just living in this lifestyle of just like, there's nothing and I'm nothing.
I think maybe because it came from a villain, maybe it's a different, like, of course a villain would believe that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but we see that throughout. How many times have we seen Loki want to be God? How many times have we seen other, Thanos almost playing God and of destroying half the universe, and we see so many people throughout all of Marvel wanting to be that it almost because almost like not surprising anymore. Even Kang, like he has that mentality, like he is God. Like I think he even said that at some point, right? I wanted to say he did, but I can't remember. But even having Kang say that, and gosh, you see that so much in Marvel, of just the power that they want to be in complete control, and which is always played as the villain usually. I mean, even Loki, whenever he believed that he was villain, he was villain Loki at the time.
Exactly.
I don't know. Yeah, it was like, there is a God. My mind goes to like, nah, just it's kind of this passes it. I think you're so used to hearing it now. You're like, all right, okay, you can believe, but yeah, that was interesting to see that, but Rocket seeing all of, they save all the humans, and he's like, what about the others? When then he sees the baby and he sees Raccoon. He's like, he is a raccoon.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees all the babies in there. Oh, that whole scene.
It's just like I think it's funny how we all knew that he was a raccoon, but the fact that like we finally get that moment of like,
he's Rocket Raccoon.
Exactly. He comes to the realization that he's a raccoon. It's like, he knows now. It's like,
dang. And you just see their fear in their faces, and I'm like, oh my gosh,
which that's kind of interesting how we open up the movie with somebody grabbing Rocket, and like how in return he comes, instead of like having like this very just like violent aggressiveness, he comes with this gentleness, and it's like, come on, I'm here to save you.
He saves all the precious animals, and even the weird one, little thing when they saved him, and I was like, they better come save him. And I knew it, like when he was picking him up, I bet you the High Evolutionary is going to pop in any moment now.
Yeah.
And he did. And that whole scene was crazy. And you see like, but then his family was there to help him. The Guardians family to help him to stop him.
I don't know how you felt about that scene, but I kind of wanted Rocket to be the High Evolutionary by himself. Because like I feel like we missed so much of him from this entire film because he was dead, and then it's like, okay, mano y mano.
Yeah,
like, I kind of wanted him to just be like, all right, I'm gonna take you out, because like he
did that when he was little. He literally scratched his face off, and I was just like, why am I okay with this?
but at the same time. At the same time, now I'm thinking back on it, I feel like we've seen enough Marvel films to like have that same scene of like the big bad versus the good, and then the good big bad fights off like 3 or 4 times, and then eventually the good wins, and like it does make sense, the fact that like the final really fight scene,
because he was his dream since he was little with his family, with his friends, was to go out into space,
to see the sky,
to see the sky. And the fact that they didn't make it, when he saw them, on his deathbed, I was like, oh my gosh. And then, but that was his family. Like, I think that's what, I don't know. At the end of this movie, when, obviously they all crossed over, and then we see.
Did they?
Well, they all went over to the other. I mean, the majority of them, I at least saw all the animals and everyone go over. But then Peter went back. I was like, they're going to kill Peter.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. I think we all kind of like, I was already sobbing and crying already because his face went crazy. And I'm like, we haven't seen that. But it was also an ode to the first film.
Yes.
Remember, like he was out, wasn't it? He was out there, and Gamora was the one. Was it Gamora? Oh, my brain. I haven't seen the first one in a hot minute.
But I definitely know what you're talking about.
Yeah. But I giggled when Adam came in, and the shape that they did was just like the
hand of God. The picture. It's literally.
Is it Michael? No. What is it?
I think it was Michelangelo.
The painting.
Or was it
the Sistine Chapel one? Was it? Oh, I have to look at. No.
You guys know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up because it's gonna be crazy.
But like I love how, again, more just Christian undertone of like how when we think someone's gonna die, God reaches out and he brings them back to safety. In the same way with us, like even when we think like the end is over, like he comes in and saves us and shows us grace. And how, I don't know, it was just a beautiful picture because I love how in one moment Adam was like, why did you save me? Like, why did you bring me back? And then Drax tells him because everybody deserves second chances. And he used that second chance to go and save someone else. It's just like,
It was
perfect.
like, I mean, it honestly is. And like, yeah, it is the hand of God one, but yeah, it's literally Adam touching the hand of God is like
Hmm.
Michelangelo thing. And so for them to almost kind of recreate that was so cool to see. It just has an ode to that. You see, God reaching out, but you see Adam like seeing like, well, because because I was shown that grace, like I'm gonna help
Hmm.
out. And then um the hug at the end, and Adam's like, I think I should hug now. Like he just didn't know what to do with his hands.
I feel like we've all been caught up in that moment. It was kind of like, I don't, sure, I guess I'll be a part of this moment.
Yeah. Um, I think what was really cool. This is obviously we're getting to the end now. Gamora this whole time was just like did not understand Groot at all. I am Groot. I don't get it. All I hear is I am Groot.
Hmm.
I am Groot. And eventually she's able to understand him. And eventually the audiences were able to understand Groot at the very end when he says, "I love you all." We understood. Like that's what James Gunn
Hmm.
said. Like that is the moment. Like that is that's what they hear. But we've been hearing I am Groot this whole time, but this is the finally that we get to hear what Groot actually says.
Exactly. Which when I watched it the first time, I was like, why wasn't I shocked the fact that he just said I love you? Like the man spoke English for the first time. But
That's
then
to us.
the
Yeah.
second time I was like, oh, this is for us. I was
It's
like,
for us. It's for us.
oh.
Oh my gosh. I was so heartbroken. I understood it. I think it was a good, when Peter's like, "Hey, I'm leaving," and everyone's kind of like disbanding a little, it's the end of it.
Right.
Um, I was sad because I'm like, Rocket literally, like, we just hear Rocket's story and now you guys are leaving him?
Yes.
Excuse me? Like, I was like, no, no. Um, but, but with that, I get it.
Hmm.
Nebula and Drax is leading this new city, pretty much guiding everybody. They're like, they're the leaders now of the town. And Mantis, which she was so right, she hasn't had time for herself to do what she
Yeah.
wants to do. She's always been with someone else, what they want to do. And we get that. And um, I just think it's still weird that Mantis and Peter are siblings. I'm like, oh
I
yeah, I
know.
forgot about that. Um, and then obviously decides to go back. Um, he decides to go back to Earth, and he goes in and he sees his grandfather, and his grandfather embraced him. Ugh.
He, that look on his granddad's face, like I lost it. I started bawling because I was like, what like a moment to like, because I feel like we haven't seen much of the granddad since the first
No,
film.
but think about what he's been through. He literally lost, and what
Exactly.
Mantis said, like, your grandpa was trying to protect you probably in that
Yeah,
moment, and he loses his daughter, and then his son is missing. He doesn't know what happened to his son, or his grandson. I mean, his grandson's literally
exactly.
missing for all those years. Never knew what happened. Can you imagine that feeling? So he recognized him though. I thought that was so sweet.
Yeah.
And then obviously Rocket's left as the leader, and of
Uh,
course he is.
our captain, our captain.
Yeah, and we see the two end credit scenes. The first end credit scene or post credit scene is Peter having cereal with his grandpa. Was that the last one or the first one?
That was the last one. The first one was
Oh,
they
that's right.
were on that planet where the
So it was
manager,
Cosmo. Oh, the
yes, it
manager.
was
That's right.
where the
Yeah,
manager was from because they had pink skin. I coordinate.
I remember that. Yeah, yeah.
It was Rocket, Cosmo, um, Groot, Adam, and then what is his name?
Oh,
I forget his name all the time.
Kraglin.
Yes.
hmm and then we see Gamora back with the Ravagers, and that's her family. Like you see, like they were just
Yeah.
embraced, like that's her family now,
Hmm.
and which is why we understand why she decided not to go back. And you see a little bit
Yeah.
of a spark at the end with Peter and Gamora, but
Yeah. I'm kind of glad they didn't like rekindle that. I feel like that would have
yeah,
just been too obvious and too rushed and be like, okay.
Well, then
whatever.
we were told that Star-Lord's going to come back.
I know. So like,
but I feel like Chris Pratt hasn't. I think he had said, he hopes that he comes back in a way that's honoring to the character. So I don't know. It has to be really tasteful. It has to be like end of the world kind of thing for him to come back.
Yes.
Then just, I don't know. It's like what's left for him? What does he do next?
I don't know. I guess we'll have to see how the Miss Marvel film plays out.
Yeah.
And
Man.
Scrolls.
Yeah.
Secret
we got
Invasion.
Secret Wars coming out, and I'm excited, but obviously right now we don't know what the future of the timeline of when the movies are going to come out because of the writer's strike that's happening right now in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, I think the last writer's strike was like a couple years ago. And it lasted for around 100 days, and it did push back a lot of projects, which is like all the right to them. I mean, they need fair wages, like, of course. So, and I think Rob Lowe was even out there, like, with them and protesting and stuff like that too. So, so that's kind of what's happening right now in Hollywood right now. Obviously, the first ones that are going to go are the that might have to wait a while is all the late night shows. That's kind of what they were saying, Jimmy Fallon and all those guys. Yeah. And then after that, it's kind of everything else. And I just saw an article this morning that Blade is going to be pushed back because of the writer's block or the writer's strike. And so with that, obviously we know how that works. They all have to align in the same way. So if one's pushed back, they're all going to be pushed back. So
exactly.
Don't know exactly a timeline. I know we have already a few out that are out this year, but as far as next year goes, we might have to wait a little while. So we don't know yet. But until then, it gives us time to rewatch all of the ones if we haven't caught up on everything.
Absolutely. So if you haven't caught up, I take back what I said. You got time now.
You got time now. You have time.
So get started. Like Disney Plus lays it all out there for you, especially now with the 2 OG Spider movies being on there.
I know. Oh, I'm glad they're all back.
Go watch.
Anyway, but Guardians, phenomenal movie. Go see it again. Maybe if you don't want to cry again. If you want to cry, if you want a good cry, I mean, go ahead, watch it.
Yeah. Yes, it's by far.
There's some sinuses and stuff.
It's one of the best movies Marvel has put out in the last 2 or 3 years. So go watch it again. Warning for all those.
I mean, if you haven't watched it, then you just heard all the spoilers.
Exactly. I mean, don't watch it. I mean, if you want to just hear our take on it, that's fine. But
anyway, there's a lot of great resources that probably talk a little bit more of Easter egg stuff. This is just our initial reaction that I normally share. But if I see any other articles that have more Easter egg, I'll share it on our social media that y'all can join and everything. And of course, I talk a little bit about our Patreon page at the end. But sweet. Thanks, Jalen, for jumping on this pod and preparing for this episode by watching both of the movies back to back.
Hey, listen, I had to be prepared. There's a wise quote that says, if you stay ready, you never get ready. So
there you go.
Thank you for having me.
Is there anything that you want to tell listeners? It could literally be about anything. Anything you want. It could be about the movie. It could be about whatever other thing whatever it is.
Well, I will choose to die on this hill that there's no such things as boneless chicken wings. Okay? Because boneless chicken wings are just chicken nuggets with wing tossed on it. Okay? Chicken wings are bone in.
Hot take.
And if you don't like it, hey, you're wrong.
Honestly, yes. Yep. There you go. I agree with that statement. I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, you're right. It is. Well, thanks so much, Jalen, for jumping on this episode as we reviewed Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. For all you listeners, we will see y'all next week. Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Nerds and Jesus podcast. This podcast is produced, edited, created, and hosted by me, Mary Howell. I also run our social media and Patreon page and also did our art. The music is by John Bjork. And if you're looking for a way to get connected into the Nerds and Jesus podcast community, you can follow us on social media at Nerds and Jesus. And for more bonus content, physical merch, and so much more, you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/nerdsandjesus. You can also become a producer level patron as a supreme nerd, where you will get your name read at the end of every episode as well. If you would like to continue to support the show, you can share this podcast word of mouth with everyone you know. You can also review and rate our episode wherever you get your podcast. Anything helps, and thank you so much for listening to this episode. See y'all next week.